the third big force I want to talk about is the aging population. The world is getting older, and that has some big implications for business and governments as we go here. And I just want to point out a couple of factors here. You know, in 2050, the number of people over the age of 80 will be 400 million. And when you think about this, the first time in history, we'll have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 14. We've never been this old as a planet. As I like to joke, as I get older, I think that's good. It's good that we have old people around in the system. But having more older people has big implications on healthcare costs, because most of the healthcare costs are consumed by older people as we go through the system. If you think about productivity in an economy, productivity comes from two things. One is labor, going into the labor force, and the second is how effective that labor is. The biggest reason why we've had a gain in labor productivity in the last 50 years is because we've had more people enter the labor force, especially women. Women entering the labor force in the United States has been the biggest driver of productivity, more so than technology in the last 50 years. But as people get older, and if they're supposed to retire at 65, we're going to start sucking labor out, which will have a big impact on productivity. So there's no way that can stay stable. People are going to have to work longer. There's no way we can retire. I highly doubt any of you will want to, yet let alone think about retiring when you're 65. I just think that's going to be a different world that we're living in. But this is going to have a pretty profound impact, and especially for China, which is a very rapidly aging population. By 2020, we're going to see it. You're going to have to deal with it in terms of shortages of skilled labor as we move ahead. Japan is just in a completely far end of the spectrum. I mean, it is shrinking away as we go through it. Lots of Europe is doing that. The one place in the world where we have a huge amount of labor, and that's why I think they'll also be more valuable, is Africa. Africa will have 1 billion new workers over this time, and that's going to be, people will be very concerned if they don't have access to it. So I find it shocking that a lot of European countries are concerned about migrants coming in. In my view, they should be opening up the doors and saying, come on down. We need the labor, because you just see it happening. And obviously it's a little more complex than I'm saying, but people are going to be fighting to attract labor in the long term. So I'm going to, again, for the sake of time, skip that. These are just some pages that were supporting what I was saying in terms of the strains on government because of healthcare costs, social security, and so forth that's required. So again, three forces: the re-rise of Asia and Africa, the economic power shift, the technological disruption that's going on is just starting, is huge, an aging population like we've never seen before. And the fourth one is a much more interconnected world. We are way more connected than we ever have been. The only time we've been close to this was in the 1900s, where there was quite a global system that was in place. But the thing I want to point out here is it's no longer just in goods and financials. It's now increasingly in services, people, and data and communications. And these are the ones that have the fastest growth rates, the connectedness of economies as we look ahead. We think that these flows, the more connected you are as a city and as a country, has big implications on your GDP growth. So it's very important that cities and countries are connected. And those that are not lose out from learning about best practices, new ideas, being able to scale their businesses across the system. So the connectedness is going to be a very important part of what we do as we look ahead. And we are seeing this happen. These are some forecasts of what we think we're going to see in terms of the flows. So again, data and communications becoming a very significant growth area, as I mentioned before. Financial services, which already was high, declining a little more. And I think this one, I think we're underestimating the people flow. I think that's going to increase toward the tail end of the 15 to 20 years as Africa comes online and as these other countries are aging. We're going to see more of that happening. More of the trade is now south-south. It's not trade that's going from, if you will, Asia manufacturing things and shipping them to Europe and North America. A lot of it is what we call the south-south trade and where things are. And that's when you think as a leader where you want to spend time. Well, I think it's important that traveling to Europe is great and traveling to North America is great. I'd be much more focused again on traveling to Africa, to Southeast Asia, as places which are going to matter a huge amount. I mentioned the refugee issue today. Just one point I'd make is we've not had as many refugees as we've had since World War II. That's where it is. And we think it's going to get worse with the geopolitics as we look ahead. The internet users, the internet population, the cross-border internet usage is going up. This is an area that's more and more difficult for countries to be able to control, especially when you have technology companies that are putting balloons up in the air to be able to provide Wi-Fi to different parts of the world. So you're seeing the rise, if you will, of transnational companies that are, in a sense, interfering with governance. And I think we're going to see more of that over time. Digitization has also allowed very small companies to become global companies. One of the things that I think is the most exciting about Alibaba is it's allowed many small, medium-sized enterprises in China to connect to a platform. And we're now going to be able to see, because of these platforms that are being set up in China and India and other parts of the world, small businesses being able to become global businesses. They won't just be the large companies that will matter. I said geopolitics is the fifth one. I talked a little bit about that already. This is an area where I think it's going to create volatility. There's not much we can do to control it, but what we do need to understand, we're going to have more volatility, and I don't think the volatility is going to go away in the next few years. It's just going to be a constant noise that you have to deal with. Being able to understand how regulators work will be very important in business as you move ahead. I'm going to give you one example here. Argentina, which has had a very, if I might just say, a strange government. Okay, they're frankly a bad government. I hope I don't insult anyone. I love Argentina, but the government is crap. I have to just tell you that. They put a system, because they were very worried about their exports and imports. They made it a requirement that if you import cars to Argentina, you have to ship the equivalent out. So if you're BMW, all of a sudden you've got to realize that you now have to be focused on exporting olives and wine. The number of cars that you're able to sell in Argentina is dependent on the amount of wine and olives that you can sell outside of Argentina, which if you're an automaker, you'd never imagine that that was part of your job description. But again, I just use it as an example to say regulations can get strange, and understanding how they work will be an important part of what we do. There are other risks. You worry about medical or healthcare risks because we're a more connected world than we ever have been, and we're becoming more connected. A problem in one part of the world can quickly spread to others. Think about MERS, the camel disease, and how that affected South Korea. The South Korean tourism industry has been beaten down because of, again, 17 people that had this particular, and it frightens people, and people worry about contamination. The internet breaking down. Just imagine for businesses if the internet shut down for an hour, what that would do. I hate to know what would happen in McKinsey. We just freeze. I don't know what we would do, because so much of our work and collaboration is done over the internet. And so we're having to test ourselves. That's part of what would we do as a leadership group if the internet literally shut down for a day and a half? How would we run ourselves? This happened, by the way, to Saudi Aramco. They had their computers hacked, and you have one of the largest oil producers in the world have their system shut down. That has a pretty big effect on what's going to happen in the world. And then natural disasters. If anyone remembers the volcano that went off in Iceland, which actually stopped flights traveling from the northeastern US to Europe for a while. So these are things we have to look at. So I've spent a long time, I hope it's okay, just going through these 5 forces because they're there, and I think as a leader you need to acknowledge that they're there. And what that's going to do is going to have profound implications in how we run businesses.